everyone for coming along this evening, and welcome to this joint event with Lighter Footprints and a number of groups out here. We're so pleased to be able to bring so many people together. We've got Slido here tonight, and we've got an English Slido and a Mandarin Slido. So I'm going to introduce Min Wen, who's going to just describe how that's going to work.
So we try to get more Chinese involved. This is really the latest, the very latest translator. So we are mirroring from the mobile phone onto this screen for. So if someone maybe not enough English, they can listen but also see on the screen in Chinese and in English. Secondly, we have the Slido Q&A, English screen and the Chinese screen.
So fantastic. Have a look at the program on your seat.
Thanks, Mick and Min Wen, and thank you all for coming. We've got a terrific panel here. 2023 has been a big post-COVID year. We see a hot summer coming. What has Labor achieved this year, and what can we expect on climate action for the Victorian government in 2024?
This is a community that is very interested in our work that we can do, not just government, but as a community, on making real action on our climate situation so that we leave a better world. In regard to the political side of it, I find myself, as way of introduction, in this position because I got interested in politics when I had kids. And so when Beck and I had kids, all of a sudden the world was bigger than just us and having breakfasts and smashed avocados. And it was more about the world that we were leaving for them. And so climate change, climate action, and our environment is a big part of that. So I'm very proud to be a small cog in the wheel of the government that has been working on climate action since coming to power in 2014. Obviously, my part in that starts in 2018. I think one of the first things that changed in regards to that was that we have a Minister for Climate Action. It used to be a Minister on Climate Change, and it's just a word. But to go to your question of the last 12 months, and I'm sure Paul will fill in anything that I forget, we have implemented our container deposit scheme that we promised. Obviously, that has a recycling angle. Circular economy work that Minister D'Ambrosio's office to do is obviously helping with less resources being used. That has a climate benefit. We have announced the end of native logging as of next year. Another, not necessarily climate action specific on emissions, but obviously is better for our environment and better for climate change going forward. I make the note on that also that there are a lot of families in our state who are going to find that transition very tough. And we as a government have a lot of work to do with those families and those communities to support them through what is a necessary decision. And I think we need to keep that in mind in regards to climate action, that we live in a world where all of our decisions have consequences, the good ones and the bad ones. Also, we made announcements last year in regards to offshore wind targets. That coupled with the announcement of bringing back the SEC, which as a reimagined SEC, for those of us who are old enough to remember, the SEC, which has started to be put into place now, will be 100% renewables, 51% minimum government investment. So that will have obviously benefits from emissions. It helps us get to our net zero target of 2045. But also it will be a resource for people, and this is work that Minister D'Ambrosio has done this year as well. The SEC will be a resource for people to go to, a trusted resource to say, I want to lower my emissions, I want to save money, what can I do in my home? And I think that comes back to governments can make policy decisions. We can give rebates, we can do the necessary steps in regards to things like forestry and emission targets. But at the end of the day, it also comes down to us as a community to take that step when it's possible.
Including upgrade of bus depots as well, because they can be large sort of generators of energy. So they're a couple of the key sectors that have been that the government's really making big strides into. So thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul. We're now going to go to Miho, who is representing Whitehorse City Council. And Miho, would you like to explain what actions Whitehorse City Council is taking over this summer as part of its climate action plan?
Yeah, so if you ask me the question in a week's time, hopefully we would have had our climate response strategy endorsed. So this coming Monday, we're taking our draft climate response strategy that will take us to 2030, as well as a climate response plan. So actions that we would do and implement over the next 2 years to implement the strategy to council on Monday. So if all goes well, the draft targets that we'll be proposing as part of the strategy, there's key 4 ones. So one is to maintain carbon neutrality for our council operations. The other is to, as we acknowledge that we need to continue to reduce our emissions over time, we've got a net zero emissions target by 2032 as part of that. So we'll have a decline trajectory, I guess, into reducing our emissions further. We'll also have a target around purchasing 100% renewable electricity by 2025. One of the main objectives of that is to show leadership, to continue to reduce our emissions, but to support our community as well. So that's quite exciting. And yeah, come Monday, we should have an endorsed plan. So the one exciting thing, and I think from this, the importance of collaboration across various governments and within the community as well. So I mentioned about the renewable electricity target, and that is a big project wing for a lot of local councils within Victoria, where 51 councils together went through a joint procurement process to actually go out to tender and purchase our own renewable electricity. So that's a big win. It was at that time quite leading, I would say, to venture out outside of our square to be able to jointly procure that. So, you know, that's a 43% reduction in our emissions just by purely purchasing 100% renewable electricity.
Mike is the campaign coordinator for Parents for Climate. So, Mike, would you like to tell us what actions or campaigns Parents for Climate will be taking over this coming summer?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me here on beautiful Wurundjeri country. And yeah, I'd just like to kind of bow to the aunties and uncles and the grandmothers and grandfathers going back to time immemorial who cared for this country. Like, that's why we can even be here. That's why this is such a beautiful place to live. How many parents in the room? Yeah, there's 12 million of us in the country, 12 million parents in this country. And as Matt said, like to be a parent, it welds you to the future. You know, I was a little adrift before my first daughter was born, but I was really powerfully connected to the future and what came after me, to her future, and kind of what sort of state I was going to leave the future in. A lot of parents care about climate. It's pretty inaccessible for a lot of parents. If you're in an advocacy group, most of you meet at like 6 p.m, right? We have our meetings at 8 p.m. It's not ideal, but the kids are in bed. You know, at least one parent can turn up. It's our job to make climate action accessible to the 12 million parents of this country. So I will talk briefly about the 3 things we've got coming up. First, we ran a pretty successful campaign to get solar on school roofs across this country. It started as a COVID stimulus, like a counter proposal to the Morrison government's idea to have a gas-fired recovery. And after a couple of years of campaigning, there's now $71 million in programs across different states to get solar on schools, which is great. We've got a real focus now on getting support for the early learning sector. There are 0 programs in this country doing any kind of support for clean energy upgrades for for early learning centres, but they operate during the day, you know, perfect for solar. Everyone's energy prices are going up. If they can raise their fees, they are. That makes things worse for parents. If they can't raise their fees because they're capped, they are more and more stretched. The big centres that can and providers that can afford to put solar on are doing it. They're saving money. The smaller centres, they just don't have the time. There's a staffing crisis in childcare in this country. So that's number one. We're looking for case studies, and I've just found out that Whitehorse has a whole bunch. So I'm very keen to talk there. Second, we have a campaign which is currently called like Neighbourhood Heat Watch, which is like a community level, kind of like the things we set up in COVID that everyone just did on their block. You're setting up like a WhatsApp group, or I did a Facebook group for my street just so that people could connect if anyone needed anything in COVID. This is going to be a hot summer. Summer's a bad time to try to do ordinary climate movement things. You're not going to hold a rally. No one's going to ring their MP. Everyone's away. But people are around and people are worried. It's going to be a hot summer. It's going to be difficult. We want to connect people so that they can care for each other. Because what we saw in COVID is that people want to look out for each other. They want to connect and they want to do what they can to support each other.
Thanks, Mike. Anne is our independent representative, our person on the ground in the community. And Anne, the question we have for you is, what actions have you taken personally and specifically in your own home related to addressing climate change?
Thank you, Jan and Lighter Footprints, for inviting me. And I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We were frustrated with the lack of policy action by governments at a macro level. And so we decided to do something at a micro level, whatever we could. So the first thing we did was install rainwater tanks. And you may wonder, what's a rainwater tank got to do with climate change? Drought is a consequence of climate change, and water is a scarce resource on this dry continent. With a tank, we became increasingly frugal users. We now use less than one person with no land. And we are a couple on a medium block, and we have an urban forest as our garden. So an edible urban forest. So the next was solar panels. We installed solar panels and haven't paid a bill ever since, till recently when we increased our electricity consumption. And I'll explain about that later. In terms of food miles, as I mentioned, we have an urban forest. So we grow more and more of our own food so that most of what we consume is fresh, organic, and produce that has no miles. In addition to reduce food miles, we don't purchase fresh or frozen product that's come from overseas. 13 years ago, I switched to a plant-based diet. It's the most effective and immediate way to have a personal impact on climate change, with much lower land and water use. It's also the most efficient calorie conversion, releasing much lower CO2 and methane compared to animal agriculture on a calorie-for-calorie basis. There's also the added benefits of better health outcomes. In terms of electrifying the home, in recent times, we've been making attempts to do that, shifting away from gas, which is a fossil fuel. First, we installed home heating, then a heat pump for hot water. And once we install an induction cooktop, we will be able to disconnect gas from our property. Insulation has been improved by underfloor heating, which reduces energy loss. Then we recently swapped a diesel vehicle for an EV and an e-bike. All of these changes have increased our electricity consumption. And to address that, we intend to install a battery next year when we come off premium tariffs. Waste is not something that's usually connected with climate change, but we think that it has an impact. And so look at everything as a resource, trying to find uses rather than a use and throw approach. Over time, we've steadily reduced our waste to landfill, to the extent that we haven't put our 80-litre landfill bin out for collection for 4 years. It is not hard. It is so easy. And that's what I really would love people to recognize, that it is so doable. Landfill sites produce methane, which is a climate change accelerator. So the less that is sent there, the better. Instead, we value add by composting all the organic matter. So nothing goes into the landfill bin, and we compost it for the garden. Plastic is also a problem because it's petroleum-based, which takes hundreds of years to break down into smaller and smaller microplastics. So again, the less we use, the better. Our approach is to buy from bulk shops where we take containers, fill and refill. For fruit and veg, we collect plastic bags and take them along with our green bags whenever we go shopping. Again, washing and reusing again and again. So you don't need to keep pulling bags when you go to the shopping centers. We refuse plastic packaged products, preferring to buy loose. In closing, over time, we've become conscious consumers, thinking about the end of life of products before we buy them, and using less and less energy and water, while also producing less and less waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Now, this is a hard act to follow. Your question is the one that Anne's just answered. In what actions have you taken personally and specifically in your own home related to addressing climate change?
Well, I can't really follow Anne at all. It's a lot more, very hard act to follow. There's a lot more for me to do. We're lucky that we have gas and electric. The gas heating basically never gets used. We'll only use the electric heating, which means we're only using gas for stovetop. Our big change which we have contemplated is to try and get solar. Unfortunately, our roof is only east facing, so which means it would be incredibly inefficient, which is also why I have resisted to date to get an electric vehicle. So I have been contemplating getting an electric vehicle, but I am conscious that the powering of that vehicle would probably be in the evening from what at the moment would still be primarily brown coal, which has sort of tempted me not to get that at the moment. I think the big area that we've been looking at more is recycling. I think the issue's been raised before about the children, and I think that's where the kids really get excited about reused recycling. That's what they're taught at school. So we try and minimise the amount of waste. I think the implementation, and I can shout out to Whitehorse Council and Burundara Council did it a couple of years. The introduction of the food and organic waste has been a huge success in my mind. Just the amount of diversion from landfills from a community point of view, I think that's been a terrific success. And I know it's something that you say us as a family has really got behind in terms of separating all our waste materials and particularly reducing what goes to landfill.
Thanks, Paul. Okay.
Same thing?
Yep.
Right. Well, I can't compete with Anne. I can't do that. But we have made a change in our house this year. So we've had a gas ducted system for decades, and for the last few years it's been on the blink, and we've had to bring people in to fix it and keep it running. So it was time for that to go. So we got a couple of guys in to look at heat pumps instead. The first mob said that they could do it in the roof, and I wasn't overly enamored with that because heating in the roof didn't seem to make a lot of sense. The second mob that we got said that they could do it underfloor with a heat pump system to replace the ducts, but they'd have to replace everything. So it wasn't exactly cheap. Luckily, thank you to the good people at Ashwood, I'm in a position with Beck working that we could afford to make that investment. And that's what it is. It's an investment. So it cost us about $17,000 to put in, which is, I know it's a lot of money, to put in a heat pump system throughout the floor in a 4-bedroom house. I'm now saving $150 odd a month from gas just with that one change, and it'll pay for itself in 8 to 10 years, and then it's paying me. So I think just to finish, what we can do as a community is, and what say the SEC can help with, is to, not everyone's going to do that version, but split systems will save a lot of money. So when it's time in your house to make that upgrade for whatever has just died, that's when come to resources, local groups, lighter footprints, SEC, state member, whoever, and go, how can I save money? And I bet you it's electrification.
Thank you. That's really, really very positive. And from our perspective in Boroondara, Electrify Boroondara has been a huge move this year, and we can all see how the community interest is there. I think we might start with you, Anne. Do you have a question for Paul or Matt?
My question actually is about the can recycling and the container recycling scheme. It's proving to be quite difficult to find locations where you can take your containers. Is there any intention to put out lists of places so that people can get to them more easily?
Yes, so there is a website that has that lists all the current sites. There is about I think close to 300 active sites, and that will be expanding to 600. So the information, I suppose it depends on how people want to receive that information will be the challenge. Obviously, there are people who want to use that service that might not be that familiar online, and then it's about, well, how does that information how is that information transferred and accepted and received by others? So I mean, welcome suggestions that you might have. I think perhaps using resources such as these organisations and these mailing lists to be able to actually provide that information to members so they can go and tell their neighbours.
Could I make a suggestion over there?
Yeah.
If the sites in any particular council area are made known, then council sends out newsletters to all the residents. So those sites could be listed on the newsletter, and then everyone could know, and in that area, which is your closest sites. I mean, if we make that kind of information more easily accessible to people, we have a better chance of it being used more.
Great.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, it is still a growing area in terms of location. So I think for Whitehorse, it's watch this space and where those locations are as we explore potential sites as well. So most definitely we'll be using our communication channels to promote locations that people can take their containers to.
Okay.
Can I just quickly add? If you go to cdsvic.org.au, so that's CDS Container Deposit Scheme, vic.org.au, it says find your nearest refund point. There's a button and it'll have search the interactive map. And as our good friends in the council said, we'll obviously, government and councils will work together to make this scheme even better as time goes on.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, Miho, would you like to ask a question of either Paul or Matt?
Paul, you mentioned about the community, like it takes time to build momentum in terms of the work that you do. In recent years and increasingly, local governments and state government has worked collaboratively on its local climate response. How do you see the different levels from whether it's local, state, federal, working together, moving into the future in its efforts to reduce its emissions or community emissions?
I'll speak for, I've got a little bit of Whitehorse, so I'm coming to leadership next week, see you then. I've mostly had dealings with Monash over the last 5 years. and now Burundara is in my patch for the last 12 months. And I've found, regardless of politics, I've found a lot of effort from councils, from council officers, from councillors, CEOs, etc., to work with governments at both levels to all try and make our climate actions positive and real. So I think I can't, as you said, you seemed happy with the way you've been working the state. So I can't see that changing. And I think, as I said before, there's always more that we can do together. And I guess as a local member, when my councils talk to me about things we need to do better or quicker, then I'll be there. My door's always open to have the chat.
Great.
And so can I just add just one small bit? I think that we are in a unique situation at the moment that the federal government, the state government and councils, particularly across Melbourne and Victoria, are really aligned on this issue in terms of wanting to achieve outcomes, and the community is behind it as well. And that is what will achieve the best outcomes when you do have all levels of government in alignment and wanting to achieve the same outcomes.
Thanks. That's great. Okay, Mike.
Oh, thank you. My question will be a bit more at the state level, I reckon, and it's kind of coming out of conversations I've been having with childcare operators again, because it's like if we can get solar on every school and childcare in this country, it's more power than a Snowy Hydro scheme, which took 30 years to build, right? You couldn't build something that big without a lot of protests and approval. You can start building this everywhere in Australia right now. Like this, the panels are sitting out there in shops, the tradies are out there, ready to work. Obstacles I've heard are centres are confused, and I really love the announcement, like the way that the SEC announcement both talks about workforce, but also talks about this kind of one-stop shop for consumers to, find out good information about what they can put in their houses. And I'm just wondering, is there got to be anything like that for small businesses? Because it seems like a lot of them are equally confused. And the other obstacle I hear is very common one, it's just the landlord problem. Like, how do you get solar on a roof if you don't own it? Most small businesses are commercial tenants, and it's just an obstacle for them. It's fine if they've got a big institutional landlord, because they tend to have sort of sustainability goals they've got to meet, but it's the small landlords like that have 1, 2, 3 properties. They're quite risk averse in this space, and it's just hampering the rollout of solar in this country. So yeah, will the SEC thing, will there be something like that for small businesses in terms of information? And second, what can we do about the landlord problem? So just tiny questions.
Well, I can start, and that can finish off perhaps. Look, I think they're two really good questions without probably specific answers this evening. On the landlord issue, Solar Homes Victoria, if I recall correctly, there is a pathway there for tenants and landlords, but it's restricted for residential. And I think what you're talking particularly would be like the small commercial, might be a retail shop or the like, where you might have an investor that has 2 shops or whatever, and so they don't have that capital. I think you're right. It's an area that probably hasn't been fully explored yet, and I think my speculation would be that there is still so much uptake that still can occur in the residential market. We're probably leaving the commercial market a little bit later, just because of some of the more complexities associated with it. But I think they're both really valid questions as to how, once this starts to evolve, about how it actually gets into that space.
Oh, thank you.
I guess I'd say on the first of the 3, on the early child care centres, kindergartens, they usually work with councils. So the building block grants that are available, and there is a pipeline as we're moving to free kinder for 15 hours, 3 years, and up to 30 hours, 4 years. There is a pipeline of capital upgrades that's going to need to be done with kinders and state. most, if not all, I can't think of one that isn't, of the new kinders that have been in my area, all came with solars on the redevelopment.
Are the new ones the state government's building, Gunny?
Well, the ones at schools,
yeah, there's the 50 new ones.
I can't give you an exact yes or no, but my experience is that is considered in the process. I would expect that's a part of the conversation. I'm happy to go and get further information on the small business, and I have the luxury of running one for 20 years of my life. I think from an SEC point of view, I would hope that the SEC would be providing that advice. I would expect it would. Like, why would you not? I mean, it's the same advice. Okay. Again, happy to follow that up and get back to you, but I would expect so, because the advice is regardless of who you are. From a business point of view, I would expect, with a change in the stamp duty for commercial properties, which came in the last budget to remove stamp duty for commercial properties, the anticipation there over time is that more commercial properties change hands. Now, I know if I was looking to either rent or buy a commercial property and I was running a business, I'd be looking at ones that were going to save me money on my energy bills. So I reckon the market might do a bit of that work for us. That's not to say there isn't a role for government in that, but I think on Paul's point is, the big user there is the residential side. Yeah. I think that's where the focus is. And there is a scheme for landlords and renters in the residential, but it does require a period of time. And then there's that issue of longer leases, and we get into a whole heap of other complexities for landlords. I know it's something the Minister has been working on. It's something that we've offered in spaces. Again, there's probably more that we can do.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Now we're going to go to questions. The first one is, any thoughts on subsidies for the purchase of electric cars? So that comes to both our state MPs.
You want me to start off?
I think it'd be great.
There has been a subsidy, and I'm just trying to remember the exact numbers. It was several thousand. I thought it was 3,000.
It was cars under 65,000, I think, or 60,000. So the pressure was I guess the incentive is, let's try and lower the cost of electric cars. I did notice the other day that I think we've gone from 2% to 8% in new car sales, so that's good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you know more about than I do.
So there has been. We did have a elephant in the room here. We did have a EV levy, which has since been disallowed by the High Court. So that won't be staying from state point of view in this form. I do think I'm digressing, but I do think in the future there will need to be a replacement at a federal level from the fuel tax to something, which is presumably what was happening. But I think even whilst that was happening, whilst that was there, those numbers of car sales have gone up. So there are incentives. I would love to see, the feds do a bit of work on this too. I'm not trying to kick it down the road, but I would like to see some luxury car tax things done. There's a lot of Teslas in my area at the moment.
Hands up if you've got an EV. Hands up, EV drivers.
I've got a hybrid, so the car hand up. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. Min Wen, have you got a question?
Many trees are going.
Trees going, yeah.
Canopy is reducing from 18%. If council says no, VCAT or Vic Smart often approve. What are Paul and Matt doing about this?
Okay, so it's about the fact
the reduction in the tree canopy. So this has been raised with me quite a number of times. So for those who are in Whitehorse, they would be aware that there was a special landscape overlay which the council adopted a few years ago, and the state government has approved interim controls and has continually renewed that over a number of years while it is looking at this issue more broadly. So this is an issue that the department is very well aware of, and it's something that I've raised with there've been a number of ministers in that period of time to work to try and come out with I guess a more robust policy in this regard. Now, I am hopeful that as part of the planning document refresh that has been announced and will take place over the next year or so, that becomes a component of that. So it is certainly it's certainly something that I've raised, and it is certainly something that the minister and the department are cognizant of.
Okay, so what Paul said is right, and so for Monash wanted similar inter-tree controls. They did theirs after Whitehorse got theirs approved. There was some debate between, well, the department didn't accept the way Monash had done it and what they were asking for, and they approved half of the controls for the neighbourhood creek zones. They didn't approve the others. Subsequent to that, Monash made another application, which was then rejected because it didn't conform to Plan Melbourne. And they were told at the time, and this is going back a couple of years now, that there is a heating and cooling of the suburbs, like a greening of the suburbs, planning piece of work that needs to be done for the whole of Melbourne. So rather, my gut feeling is on this, that, you know, when Whitehorse did it and then Monash were trying to do it, that there was like, well, hang on, we're going to get little things that are different from everywhere. That's just my gut feeling. So I fully support that work being done. Unfortunately, we had COVID in the middle and a lot of things got delayed. Now, that I'm not using that as an excuse, but we still aren't at a point where that has started yet. There were some discussions last year between the planning department and Monash on this. I know Paul have also had discussions with Minister Kilkenny's office on, well, we need to see that start. The plan is that heating and cooling program, and I'll be very quick, that heating and cooling program is done in consultation with Whitehorse and Monash, and possibly Boroondara as well. I want to see that start. So, because we need a planning scheme that helps protect the trees. From a personal note, I'd also like to see the fines go up for developers who remove the ones they're not meant to, because at the moment, it is a cost of doing business to remove the tree and pay the fine.
Yeah.
And it should be a prevention of doing business to do it. So Queensland are higher than ours. We should at least be at the same level as Queensland. That's my personal feelings that I've relayed to the Minister's office. Let's hope we see that work start very soon. I'll certainly keep pushing. What
plans exist to establish the Great Forest National Park?
The starting point is what Matt alluded to earlier, and that was the phasing out of native logging. I think that was my understanding of the Great Forest National Park, and what was being, or where that would go was designed particularly to protect the native forest and protect the habitat of the leadbeater's possum. And I know that was certainly part of the consideration in terms of phasing out the native logging, which, as Matt said, is now going to be phased out by the end of this year. So, in terms of actual discussion about when or if a national park will be gazetted, I'm not aware of any particular conversations so far.
What steps is the Victorian government taking to incentivize the development of community-based batteries to help electrification in communities?
There has been investment and promises made on community batteries that are based from government ownership, or presumably there's some big batteries that we've built as well. If I understand the question right, you're sort of talking about shared battery power between communities. And I remember I was at a forum with Electrified Boroondara earlier in the year with Saul Griffiths, and I think we were talking about that. He was talking about at that time. There is some legalities of how that works that I don't think we've got through. government, state, local, federal, otherwise. So I guess the answer is, I don't think we're there yet to have shared power of sharing your battery, and you generate the power and I pay you for it. But then, what if, I think it's complicated, and I'm not sure if that's where it'll end up or not. I honestly don't know, but I think there is a place for community batteries. How we work through, and certainly we've committed to build one. I think there's one for Monash that is planned, but as far as sharing between people, I think we're not there yet with all the legals and the regulations on that, and that's probably something we have to look at. I'm just saying that I don't think, as a regulation point of view, that the country, the state, the councils have worked on how that would work. The grid is changing slowly, and needs to change further, and that would be another change as well. So the actual, I presume, again, I'm not an expert in this, but I presume that you would also need changes within the grid and the providers of the grid to make that work too. So there's the practical side of what that regulation would be my thought too, is that, you'd have to put in a scheme, theoretically, of, I generate my power on my roof and I sell it to you. What if I don't generate my power? You've got to have it coming from somewhere else. All I'm saying is I appreciate the concept. I'm aware of the concept, and, Saul Griffiths was talking about it as well, but he was saying as well that we're just not quite there. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there or we shouldn't get there, but I don't think we're there yet. And, I'm happy to look further into what we can do to get closer. Yeah. So to the substantive question, I am aware of it. And, happy to discuss with the Minister's office about where are we. I think we're a little way off that being a reality.
I just wanted to mention that there is a community battery in Goulburn, and it has been, the whole scheme has been put together by the community. And so it is quite possible. We're a member of that, even though we live in Melbourne. And it is possible for community batteries to be set up. And for it's also a farm, a solar farm. So it is possible. We just need to get the councils and state governments, federal governments to support it more, because this was a community initiative and pushed by the community, and it is functioning and functioning well. So we already have a precedent for it.
I think there's different types of community batteries or neighbourhood batteries definition, I guess. So I think that I can see maybe the different answers that might come out of it. But for Whitehorse, so we've actually got a grant to do a business case and looking at appropriate council site to host a neighbourhood battery. And there's so many variables and so many things to consider. And that's why we're very interested in putting our hands up to develop a business case. Who's going to own the battery? What's the procurement process around it? Who's going to maintain it? All those kind of things. So it's a great opportunity for us to navigate through those different questions, and the business case, once the site is selected, will be ready at the end of this financial year. So there's great support from various governments for councils to be able to develop these business cases.
We reckon they should be in schools, because schools are the centre of their communities. It does seem to us like it's always been part of our policy ask is that schools should have batteries anyway, but that they're a good site for community scale things, just because of how they sit in the geography of the place.
I think that's a really, really good suggestion. Yeah.
So I just want to ask you, so is that funding for Whitehorse, that state funding as part of the promised neighbourhood batteries? Yes. So that work has started. It's just, I guess I was probably talking more of the person-to-person community battery, which I think is a bit more tricky. But that neighbourhood battery there are commitments and there's money in play. So that work has started.
Okay. Are there any more questions related to community batteries while we're everybody's able to put something there? Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask about community batteries before we move to the next question?
And there are rebates for batteries under solar homes as well. So there is assistance for that as well. Yeah.
One is the most technically most effective thing to do. I don't necessarily support the idea of batteries and cats. It seems classical is better, but the commercial companies which are running these trials are charging more than putting a battery in everyone's cat, which is a bit hard to mention.
Okay,
particularly if you're out in a fringe grid area out of the bush at the community factory in a neighbourhood around the hardened areas like the power and police station, supermarket and all that would be terribly valuable because then you could depower your connection to the grid and reduce the correspondence.
I note that suburban gas pipelines are being upgraded. Would it be more economical to subsidise the electrification rather than build gas utilities assets?
From my personal example, I'm already doing that, as I said. It's funny, I met with the Australian Gas Industry Group on Monday. They wanted to have a chat because they've got an office in Pinewood, which is just near my place. They are spending money on upgrading their networks. To my knowledge, that's not state government money. We are spending money as a state government on incentivising and offering rebates for people to electrify and stopping gas in new homes in January. So I think there's a clear difference there. They'll have a future in renewable hydrogen if they take it. And I think I'm happy to talk about renewable hydrogen all day long, not so much blue hydrogen. But yes, I think to answer the question, I think we are doing that. They are doing something else. That's their asset. That's their money.
Just challenge that.
Sure.
It's our money. They're a regulated monopoly, and they spend the money, and they'll get it back either from the government or from the customers.
That is true. You're absolutely right. It is the client's money, and as I said to them on Monday, I think their biggest problem isn't government making changes like what we made. I think their biggest problem is investors will leave them because there is no long-term future in a retail market. I'm talking decades, but that's my personal thought. That said, it's their asset. We have an Eastern Seaboard market in gas, and don't get me started on that because I'll be here a very long time and be very grumpy. In a way, the fact that we have that and we don't have the ability to make a gas reserve price like West Australia has is actually, in a way, helping us to move from gas. So, gas prices are very high. The quicker we get off it, the better.
Thanks.
A question from myself.
Okay.
I live in Box Hill, right? Now, two questions for Box. One is there were soft plastic recycling facilities inside of the shopping center at both Coles and Woolworths, but they were gone. I wonder why. That's one question. Another one is the food court inside of the shopping center. There are lots of plastic boxes or containers, hard plastic. People just chuck into the whatever recycle or landfill. I feel, no one is doing much about it. So I don't know. So two questions.
The waste streams for recycling have been ones that have obviously been in the news quite a bit over the last few years. The example that you gave at Coles and Woolies in particular that were collecting the soft plastics, they were just collecting them because and then sending them to landfill. So originally there was a market and they had a receiver that was actually recycling them, but that stopped some time ago, and they were just collecting them and either storing them or sending them directly to landfill. And then they said, well, we can't afford to do this anymore and we're stopping it. And it wasn't actually making any difference from a recycling point of view. So that has been something as part of the recycling strategy that the state has announced, is about looking to restart that soft plastics recycling. But there's all of the different waste streams and recycling streams have their own complexity. So obviously we talked about earlier the container deposit scheme. So that's been looked at. We're going to a 4-bin system. I believe that under the 4-bin system that soft plastics will be able to be put into the 4th bin, and that's been going to be rolled out over a number of years. That's probably related a little bit to your second question about waste disposal in the shopping centre, in the shopping mall. So as we get to a better distribution of waste streams, that will enable those different waste streams or those different type of wastes to go into different compartments. But it will, in private premises such as a shopping centre, it will require both the landlord and also consumers to be quite vigilant in terms of actually putting the right right waste in the right bins. And I think that is a big education challenge to make sure that that the waste doesn't get contaminated, because that's partly what led to the situation we're in at the moment.
Okay, thanks. We're getting close to the end, and what I thought I'd do now is ask every member of the panel just for one comment on how do you, what's your hope for 2024 in terms of public, private and government action for climate? What's the one thing that you're looking forward to? Anne?
I would have liked a little more time to think about it, but
on the spot.
On the spot. Basically, what I would really like to see is the policies that are created being actually enforced, because all too often you see well-intended policies, but they really don't get enforced, and there are no consequences. And that then becomes a completely, futile exercise. So even in terms of tree canopy, there is no enforcement. Even if there are minor fines, they actually don't get levied. They don't get charged. So there's no incentive for people to then comply with whatever the regulations are, because there's nobody enforcing it.
Miho?
So 2024, well, yes, thanks. As I mentioned before, next Monday we'll hopefully be endorsing our climate response strategy. So the next 12 months will be, I guess, a refresh for our team in engaging with our community. So we're looking to, previously we had our Sustainable Living Week of events. We're now looking to have more of an educational campaign across the year. So looking forward to partnering with various community groups. So if you're a part of, obviously Lighter Footprints, we'll be reaching out. But if you are part of a general community group who would, you feel like a council member to come out and speak to your group, please reach out and we'll be happy to organise something. Personally, I've got 3 little kids under the age of 10. So I think for me in the next 12 months is being intentional with our kids. So it's very much of a disposable, I guess, environment, as kids want this and that. So I think that's something to look forward to instill in my kids. Thanks.
More clean energy. Clean energy keeps our kids safer now and into the future. We just want more of it for our kids. Specifically, we want like every Australian kid to benefit from the transition to clean energy. And like schools, early education facilities can just be sites of that transformation of those kids learning about their place in a clean future economy. And they can be sites of distributed generation. So I would just love to see more investment in clean energy in the places where our kids are learning who they are and who they're going to be.
Well, I'd like to see the greening and cooling strategy finally released and action taken, given that it is something that I had started raising in 2019. I think in that broader vein as well, I mean, we know the government has announced that it's going to be refreshing the planning document, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in the planning space to make sure that we get the climate action, energy efficiency, recycling embedded into our planning documents, so that and our planning strategies, so that when we are the growth that is predicted can occur in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. So that's what I'd be looking forward to.
I just want to see us keep working on getting closer to our targets, to continue the work that we've been doing as a government, as a state, as a community. All right. I love the fact that you're all turning up tonight. For my part, I will continue to turn up when I'm asked. I'm sure Paul's the same. It's important we have these conversations. It's important because of all of the reasons that our other panelists, and I thank you all for coming too. Thank you so much. It's really important conversations, and it's about the world that we're all going to leave to the next generation. We can't undo what may have been done before, but we can make sure we're doing everything we can for today and tomorrow. So anything I can do to help that and to keep that work doing, that's what I'll be doing next year.
Great.
Jan,
Thank you.
Sorry, I have thought of a burning question, something that I would love to see for next year. Can I please?
Of course.
Indulge me? Thank you. We all know that climate change is having a huge impact on wildlife, and it's only going to get worse. I would love to see the government stop the killing of our wildlife, or stop allowing the killing of our wildlife in the form of the duck shooting that's allowed every year, as well as the license to kill our apex predator, the dingo, under the guise of being called wild dogs, which research over the last several years has proved that there is no such thing as a wild dog. 98 or 96% of all dingo DNA that has been tested proves that they are dingoes. They're not crossbred. So we have to stop killing our apex predator under the guise of calling them wild dogs. And we have to stop shooting our aquatic birds and decimating those populations. So that's something I would dearly love to see for next year.
I'm Dave. I'm going to do the thanks. I'd like to thank everyone on the panel. Matt and Paul, thank you very much for coming. It's really good to have our local MPs willing to come and interact with us. So thanks for coming and doing that, and hopefully we can do more of that in the future. Miho, I'd like to thank you for coming from the council and talking about that interaction between our local government and state government. So it's really good to see that happening, and hopefully we can see more of it and faster, I guess. Mike, thank you for coming along and talking about that great passion we all have for a greater future for our kids and young people and future generations. I guess we've got that, we know we've got that urgency behind the actions that we're working towards, so accelerating them is a really important thing. And Anne, thank you so much for inspiring us and showing us the individual path that we can be on to live more sustainably, to take climate action. We can all do something. We need the big guns in the government doing big things, but we can all be a part of that greater sustainability for a more sustainable world. So big hand to our panel. I'd like to thank Jan for doing a marvellous job of emceeing the panel as well. So big hand.
That's so good.
I'd also like to thank all those that have contributed to tonight. We've got ACF Chisholm up at the back and a couple of tables, people that have come and done that. I'd like to thank Sally and Julian doing the photos, fantastic, and Tim on audio. So thank you very much to those people doing that tech bit. And particularly like to thank people from English Corner that have come along and Min Wen as well.
10 seconds. We need to thank ACF every Saturday. We migrants learn English. ACF every Saturday.
So good.
Anyone have spare time to book the shop at the entrance of the shop and help us speak English, but also learn more about environment protection, climate action, everything.
And I have to say, having been a part of that, it's a really great cross-cultural exchange and fantastic thing to do. Sean, I'd like to thank you. We had a bit of an experiment to see how we go with the translator. So thank you, Sean, for managing that for us. I guess we can probably improve that and take some learnings out of it. I'd be interested to know if it was useful for people or how useful it was. I think I've pretty much covered everything. We've got some gifts to hand out to the panel. So, Alison, would you